For this project, I am using some watercolor paper. This one happens to be 8 inches by 8 inches, but you can really do this in any size. I'm going to go ahead and rip a piece of paper out, have it ready to go. I also have a cup of water, some brushes in various sizes. I like to use round brushes for this project. I have a couple of real leaves, but you could go ahead and use fake leaves as well. I tried to get a couple different shapes. I'm also going to use wax paper, stuff that you find in your kitchen. A sheet that's about the size of the paper that you're using is perfect. And I am also using watercolor paints. I just have mine in a big tray. You can use them in any form. All right, if you want to, you can also tape down your paper so it doesn't move, but I ended up turning my paper so much that I just left it not taped down. So you may have to deal with a little bit of curling while you work if you decide not to tape your paper down. The first thing I'm going to do is fill my paper with water by getting my entire paper wet. I want this to be a nice wet on wet technique, so I'm having my entire paper filled with water first before I start laying in some color with my watercolor. Now, when I do this first layer, I do want to keep it a little bit lighter, but I do want my colors to be bright before I put the wax paper on. So I'm trying to use more of like yellows and golds to keep it a little lighter, but I'm still trying to get nice rich colors. So I'm just kind of dabbing them and then letting the water do the work of spreading it out over the paper. I'm trying not to brush it too much because I don't want lots of brush strokes. I'm trying to dab instead of brush. And I'm just really wanting to fill the whole paper with water and color. You can add a little bit more. You see I added a little bit of oranges and reds, and that's okay too. Now I'm going to take my wax paper and I'm going to start laying it right on top of my wet page. You can see that it's wet because it will kind of stick to the wax paper. So I want to make sure there's some good sticking going on there. I like to just kind of rip it into strips and make sure my whole paper is covered. Then it's very important to let it dry. So go ahead and put it aside and wait to make sure that it is completely dry. So I've gone ahead and let mine dry, and now I'm going to pull my wax paper off to reveal a really nice texture left behind from the wax paper. Your page should be dry to the touch. You can kind of see some of that texture going on. It looks pretty cool. Once I get my leaves in a good spot, I'm going to go ahead and outline my leaves. And you can decide how detailed you get with this outline. I am not going and putting in every little cut and curve of the leaf. I'm just trying to get kind of the general outline. It'll be a lot easier to paint if I don't do every little time that the leaf goes up and down, but just kind of get the overall feel for the shape of the leaf. So I'm going to go ahead and do 2 leaves right away, and it doesn't really matter what shape they're in. I just kind of make sure that they are placed in a spot on the paper where they take up a good amount of space. You can also make sure or add one that's kind of hanging off the edge of the paper too. So I'm going to go ahead and come up with one more spot, maybe up on top here, where I've got just part of a leaf kind of hanging over the edge of the page and then going off the side and the top so that you can't see the rest of the leaf. Like that. All right, so I have 2.5 leaves on my page. Now the plan is to paint around those leaves. So that's where we get the negative painting technique. So I am going to be using kind of a golden color, like a yellow ochre, quinacridone gold, to paint the negative space on my paper. So that is the space around the leaf shapes. And I like using a round brush for this because you can get the real small areas if you need to, or you can, get larger spaces as well. So I am trying to be very careful next to my leaf edges, and sometimes I like to even make my gold a little bit darker right next to the leaf, and then I'm not as worried. It can be a little lighter as it gets farther away, but that's just up to you. We do want a definite change in value from the leaf to the background. So we want the leaf value to be lighter than the background value. So I'm just taking my time and I'm trying to just kind of fill in this area with some nice golden color. Very carefully painting around each of my leaves. So this is where I was mentioning it's probably best not to get super duper detailed with your leaf outlining, because then you'd have to paint all the little edges of the leaves, but that's really up to you. So I'm just taking my time, making sure I have enough paint on my brush to fill all the way around, get a nice color going around my leaf. Now, this painting is done in lots of layers, and it is very important to let the layers dry in between layers. So it's definitely a painting that you want to do or you want to work on while you're doing something else. Maybe you're working on another project, another painting. Maybe you can just kind of come over, add a layer, and then go work on something else, not art related or whatever, but you definitely have to let things dry in between layers, which is probably the hardest part. So I'm going to go ahead and get this whole background wet with this layer, and then I'm going to have to let it dry again. So keep that in mind as you work on this project. There is a lot of dry time needed. To speed up the drying process, you can always use a blow dryer for your hair. Sometimes I use that when I'm not very patient, but my favorite thing to do when working on projects like these is to kind of jump around from project to project. So I'll work on this one, add a layer, then I'll go work on another painting, and then when I need a break from that one, I'll come back to this one and add another layer, and so on. So I'm just working my way around. You can see in the top right corner right now that there's more of a reddish color, so don't be afraid to add a variety of colors to the background as long as the values are the same. So I don't want to get too dark with my values too soon. This should be kind of a medium light value, but obviously darker than the leaves. Got a little bit in my leaf, so I was just kind of pulling it out with my finger. And here I am finishing up my background. So you can see those 3 leaves all of a sudden really stand out a lot more. All right, time to let them dry. But before that, I want to add a couple more just dots of paint while they're wet, or even kind of splatter. If you get some paint on your brush, you can kind of use your finger to flick it onto your paper just to add a little bit more texture, excitement. splotches of color. I thought my leaves were a little too light, so adding some speckled splashes of art, of some paint on them, kind of added a little bit more excitement to them. And if the background is still wet when you do this, it can kind of just soak into the background, but makes it a little bit more interesting. So splatter painting is definitely a fun thing that you can play with throughout this project as well. Okay, now I let it dry, and the rest of this tutorial I have sped up a little bit because it is a lot of the same steps. Next, I'm going to trace my leaves again, just like I did the first time. I'm finding some places for them and I'm tracing them. However, I do not want to trace them over the leaves that I already have there. So I'm making sure not to make lines over those leaves. These leaves should be under the first set of leaves that I drew. So I'm just making sure to stop when I get to another leaf. You can see they're kind of underneath these leaves. And don't forget to throw some that are hanging off the edges. Throw a couple here hanging off the edges behind the other leaves. Okay, so I have 4 little sections that are new. Now I'm going to paint another layer on the background, but I'm going around all of the leaves that I have so far. So the first layer of leaves and now the second layer of leaves are not going to be painted in this step. So I'm going around this one. This is a new leaf that's kind of hanging off the edge here. So I'm not going to paint that one. I'm just going around it. I'm still going around my first layer of leaves as well. So sometimes it can start getting kind of tricky in these points because you have to think, okay, where are my new leaves? Where are my old leaves? I can only paint around certain areas, so I have to be kind of careful and really pay attention to what's what. So I'm painting around my first layer of leaves and my second layer of leaves with a darker value, so that at this point, by the end of this step, I should have 3 values. A really light value, like a medium light value, and kind of a medium value. I'm just going around anything that's not, or that is a leaf, still painting the negative spaces. No painting on leaves right now. Only the areas around. I do like to sometimes make my lines a little bit darker right next to the leaves so that it makes the leaves really pop out. So if there's a leaf shape, I try to kind of really push the darks right next to it, like so. Let it dry. It's dry to the touch. Now I'm going to do the same thing again. So I'm going to trace my leaf again, but I'm going to make sure that I don't go over any of the leaves that I already have on. So basically I'm making these lines under 2 layers of leaves now. So I'm looking for areas of the background that are larger, and I just want to fill them up with some leaves, some leaf shapes. And I'm going behind all of the leaves that I have so far. Now I'm going to paint the negative space. So again, I'm looking on my paper for anything that's not a leaf, and I'm painting that in. This time I'm going with a really dark value. This is going to be my darkest dark. I'm using a mixture of brown and red for this one because I wanted it to be nice and rich. I'm trying to use a lot of thick paint and go all the way around every leaf. So this is going to be kind of different little shapes. Just have to kind of look for it and try to figure out what is a leaf and what isn't a leaf. And sometimes, to be honest, you just have to make it up. This one I wasn't sure about, so I just drew a line and made something up. Or here's a big area that doesn't have a leaf, but instead of just painting the whole area, I'm just going to choose a section of it to paint in and pretend that a leaf is kind of hanging off the page. So at this point, you don't have to be quite as fancy. You can just look for areas that haven't been painted yet and just paint a section of them in, and it will still look like it's a leaf way underneath some of these other leaves. So I definitely kind of bend the rules for this step. I find an area that's not leaves, a negative area, and fill part of it in or all of it in with my darkest dark. You can see as I do this, it's really giving the painting some depth. Just having these changes in values really makes these leaves stand out. All right, I will let that dry. Now I could leave it like this and be done, but I decided that I wanted to add some veins to my leaves. So here I'm just going back in with some different colors, and I'm drawing in the little veins that happen on the leaves just to give them a little bit more detail so they don't look like just cut out shapes. But this is optional. If you just want to leave them as the leaf shape, you could do that too. I'm starting off with my lightest leaves, giving those veins, and I'm using kind of the golden color to keep them kind of light. I'm just using the real tip of my brush so that I keep my veins nice and thin as well. And then I will start moving into the next layers of my leaves, and I can kind of make my veins a little bit darker on those. I feel like just this little bit of detail, adding these little veins, just kind of really helps these leaves come to life. I'm just trying to fill in any of the spaces, just kind of guessing what the veins might look like. If you wanted to get real particular, you could be studying your actual leaf, trying to make the veins similar to what you see. But I'm just looking for any open areas to kind of indicate what the veins might be doing in those areas. You can also splatter paint again if you wanted some more of the splatters in at this point as well. Sometimes I'll even add little shadows like this just by tracing some darks around some of my leaves to make them pop out just a little bit more. And all of this is just kind of adding a little bit more to the layering of my painting. Thank you so much for joining me. This is just one of the ways you can do negative painting. You can really do it with any shape, but this is a great one to play around with for fall. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please come back for more fun. I've got a great heart one with negative painting as well. All right, hope to see you again soon.